Today's edition of Mac Voices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of PDF Pen for Mac, PDF Pen Pro for Mac, PDF Pen for iPhone and iPad, PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPhone and iPad, Text Expander for Mac, Text Expander for iPhone and iPad, and Disk Label. Find out more about all their great products at smilesoftware.com. And by the Mac Voices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter, to stay up to date on all the Mac Voices news. Subscribe from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Welcome to MacNotables on Mac Voices. This is the Talk of the Mac Community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, I get to do this once a year and only once a year for the first time in 2016. Mr. Ted Landau. Ted, it's great to have you back.
It's great to be back. Good talking to you.
It's good talking to you. I've missed it, and I can't believe we're already headed toward the back end of February, and we haven't had a chance to chat.
Yeah, we were doing it about once a month, but somehow we let January slip by. So Here we are in February.
Well, I know January was busy for me with CES and everything, and I'm sure that it was busy for you with this preparing for the Super Bowl and all.
Yes, and running for president.
Yeah, well, that too. How's that going?
Very well, very well. Yeah. As soon as Trump drops out, I'm in, I think.
For the Republican Party?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Okay, yeah. Ted Landau in 2016.
Well, maybe a few more people have to drop out, but maybe everybody has to drop out.
Okay, that'll be the next time we get together. We got to do the show.
Okay.
Brian Chaffin and I had talked about doing a new podcast, a political podcast called "I'm Right and He's Wrong," and that we could both do the intro that way, and we'd be covered. So
sort of as I win, tails you lose.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So you've been up to a few things since we chatted, and I know one of those is a bright, shiny new iMac.
Yes, which I'm using right now, which seems to have a more wide-angle view than the old one. As I look in the background behind me, I see more of the office than I remember seeing the last time we did this. So
Definitely. And the camera looks great.
Yeah,
it really does.
You can't actually see the camera, but you can.
The results of the camera.
The results of the camera. I can't actually see I just see this little yellow light, or green light, or some color. I'm colorblind, so I don't even know what color it is.
I did not know that. You're colorblind? Yeah.
Well, not completely. I mean, I see color, but technically I'm called color weak. I have trouble with red and green.
I did not know that. That's interesting. Well, that'll be a topic for some time.
Okay.
But with that, tell us about your new iMac. What did you get and why?
Well, I got a new iMac, the 27-inch Retina display iMac, and I've been writing about it on my blog. I think there was 3 columns that took before we resolved. The first column was, which was months ago now. I think we might have even talked about it in a previous podcast. Was my trouble with giving up on my Mac Pro. I had a 2009 Mac Pro, and I really liked the idea of having internal access and having and having a headless Mac that could have a monitor that I could replace if a new monitor came along that I liked better without having to sell the whole computer. I liked everything about it except how big it was. That was probably the only thing I didn't like, and a little bit noisy too. And then as I looked at the options to get a new Mac to see whether there was anything that could successfully substitute for the 2009 Mac Pro, I couldn't find anything, and that was the subject of the first article: why the Mac Mini didn't make it, why the iMac didn't make it, why the new 2013 Mac Pro didn't make it, and I won't go through all that again. So, and that left me trying to figure out what I was going to do, and I think I said at the time that I was leaning towards getting an iMac, and that's where it stood. And then about a month ago, I wrote a column because I had finally decided to get an iMac. And so that column was a little bit more about what iMac I was going to get and why, and more to the point, I guess, why I was going to get it now. I started talking, well, I could wait. This iMac doesn't have Thunderbolt 3 or USB-C. Those things are coming. On the other hand, they just upgraded it with a Skylake processor, and it's quite nice. And so we talked a little bit more about the timing of why this may or may not be the best time to get an iMac, and which iMac I was going to get, and why why it was time to give up on the Mac Pro under any circumstances. It just was causing me too many problems in terms of software inconsistencies and things like that. So, and then I finally got the iMac, and the most recent column then discussed the last dilemma I had, which I think is the most interesting. It's the one I spent the most agonizing time on in the end, and listeners might find it. Viewers. Are we listeners or viewers? Or
both. Yeah, both.
People.
I like it.
My people who listen to this podcast or view this podcast. I guess I can't get. It has to be one or the other. Okay.
People who consume the podcast.
People who consume. Ooh, that's an interesting thought. Yeah. Then there's no podcast left, and until I defecate it out in a couple of days.
Leftover podcast. No, I'm sorry.
Might be interested in, I guess, is where I was going. And that was the issue over the Fusion drive versus the flash drive. And feel free to chime in here anywhere if you want to offer your own views on this. But the dilemma I had is, my first thought was Fusion drive, no problem. Because 3 terabytes, great amount of storage space. I figured I'd never use up 3 terabytes of data until I was ready to get a new iMac, and it was my wife. In fact, the iMac that you see behind me right now is my wife's iMac. We both have separate iMacs, and she got it about a year and a half ago with the Fusion drive. It's been working perfectly. It's fast. It's quiet. It's 3 terabytes, and so I saw no reason not to get one at first. But then the techno inner geek, whatever, the part of me that reads all the blogs about what people say you should or shouldn't get started infiltrating my thoughts on the matter. And I started thinking, okay, people, the Fusion drive, it's still halfway an old traditional hard drive, and not only that, it's a pretty slow 54 RPM traditional hard drive. And not only that, there's some discussion that the Fusion drive can be prone to more problems when the connection between the SSD and the hard drive portion can fail. And I think Dan Frakes tweeted me that had recently happened to him, and he knew it happened to some other people, and I'd heard it happen to a few people. Again, I'm not saying it happens to everybody, but it was enough to give me some concern. And then I just like the idea. I knew that SSDs were the future. I mean, you can't even buy a MacBook today that doesn't have a pure SSD. There's no Fusion drive for the MacBook, and really, there's no Fusion drive for the 2013 Mac Pro. Really, the only place left that you get a Fusion drive right now is the iMac, and I figured its days were numbered. Probably 3 years from now, 4 years from now, there won't be a Fusion drive for the iMac. They'll have gone all SSD. And so I'd be future-proofing myself if I went SSD. And then on top of that, I started reading the statistics in which Apple was boasting that this year's they had improved the iMac so much with this 2015 model that the SSD on this year's model was 2.5 times faster, or up to 2.5 times faster. They always that phrase, up to 2.5 times faster, which can be misleading. I mean, that can mean one day a year it's that much faster, and the rest of the day it's just the same as last year. But anyway, up to 2.5 times faster as last year's SSD. And I said, well, the truth is, of course, I can't imagine that I'm ever going to need that much speed. But it's like going into a store and being convinced you want to buy a Lamborghini because it can go 200 miles an hour. Not that you're ever going to go 200 miles an hour, but it's nice to know that it's there. So I convinced myself, yeah, I wanted the SSD drive. But then of course, it started swinging the other way, because I said, well, SSD drive, I don't want to spend the money to get the 1 terabyte SSD drive. And even if I did, it wasn't going to hold all the data that I had. So, because I have almost 2 terabytes of data on my system now, and so I said, okay, I'd settle for the 512 gigabyte SSD. But I said, that seems so tiny. I said, well, compared to the 3 terabytes I could have gotten with a Fusion drive, now I'm going to spend more money and get only a half a terabyte instead. It seems ridiculous. Why would I want to do that? And so I couldn't settle any place. I kept going back and forth between the pros and cons of those two. And I finally decided, to go somewhat reluctantly with the 512 gigabyte SSD drive. My thinking was, no matter what, I'm going to need external storage anyway. It's not like getting 3 terabytes eliminates external storage, because I'm going to need it for backing up the computer, because I make local mirrored backups with SuperDuper, Carbon Copy Cloner, whatever you want to use. And so I'm still going to need a local external drive for that. So as long as I'm going to need external drives anyway, why worry about whether I can get all my data on the SSD drive? I'll have one external drive for data and another one for backup. And actually, I sort of like that idea in some ways, because I like the idea of keeping like my iTunes music and my photo library off of the startup drive, on the theory that the startup drive is the most likely of your drives to get trouble for some reason, to go crazy, and if my startup drive got corrupted and went underground, at least it wouldn't be affecting, hopefully, my media and photos, which would be hard to replace. So I said okay, but then the question was, what sort of drives? Well, I settled that anyway, and I ordered the iMac with the 512 gigabytes. So let's pause there for a second. Even though I still had some regrets about whether I might have waited for the next iMac with the supposed Thunderbolt 3 coming along. But then I said, I really wanted, and it'll get a little sidetracked here, I really wanted the Retina display. And I really wanted a new iMac that wasn't giving me all the little headaches that my Mac Pro was. And I just decided it just wasn't worth another year to wait. And even if these new ports came along, I didn't use the ports for a lot of things anyway that would require whatever benefits they had. So I could live with USB 3 and Thunderbolt 2, which were already a lot better than what I had on my old Mac Pro.
So
chime in.
Yeah, so you got 512. You got a 512 SSD, and how much RAM?
16 gigabytes, but I can easily upgrade it to 32 anytime I want.
Okay.
I decided to get the 16 gigabytes from Apple because it came on 2 8-gigabyte chips, leaving the other 2 ports, the other 2 slots empty, and so that I could just fill them with another 2 8-gigabyte RAM chips whenever I needed to.
Okay, so that sounds like, and of course you got the 5K Retina. So
yes, yeah, and then I upgraded to the i7 processor.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
No,
I was just going to say, what was the thinking there? Just, if you're spending the money, just go ahead and get it as fast as you can.
Yeah, it just didn't seem worth the good money after bad. I don't know, but by the time you're spending this much money to not spend the extra $250 to get the faster processor, I have found in some purchases that I made recently that, and this may be a function of how much disposable income I have, because other people might feel differently, but I found that I'm much less likely to regret spending more money than less money, in the sense that if I spend $250 and I find 5 years from now that it didn't make much of a difference, so I'm out $250 over the course of 5 years, $50 a year, averaged across 5 years, not that big a deal to me. On the other hand, if it really would have made a big difference, then I go the next 5 years with something that made a big difference just because I was too cheap to spend $250. That would feel a lot worse. And and so I've leaned towards, if it isn't too much money, towards spending the extra money if I think it could make a difference.
I don't think that's a bad philosophy. Interesting that you would look at it as amortizing it out over 5 years. I guess I would look at it a little bit differently, that I would be asking the question of how often am I interested in upgrading or buying a new machine and tasking this to some secondary function. Because then maybe you can justify not spending that extra money on just this one machine. But I'm kind of with you. More often than not, if you buy the top end, you future-proof yourself to some degree, and unless you just are one of those that just constantly turn machines over, just like cars. I mean, some people turn cars every 2 or 3 years, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But
well, if you lease a car, you get a new one every 3 years. So.
Yeah, if you do it that way. So, Okay, so you made that decision. How about external storage? Because that's obviously the next part of the puzzle.
Yeah, so I had decided to get a ThunderBay from OWC, Other World Computing. Really neat device. I got the empty one, not the one that's pre-configured with RAID. Essentially what it is it's a box that connects to your Mac with a Thunderbolt 2 cable and to a power supply as well. And it has 4 slots for hard drives. You can either put 3.5 traditional hard drives in it or with an adapter tray and SSD, your choice. And I had 2 hard drives and an SSD that were in the Mac Pro that I just, with next to no effort at all, transferred over to the ThunderBay and booted up my new iMac, and suddenly I had access on external drives to everything that had been on my Mac Pro. It was beautiful. And it has, of course, a Thunderbolt 2 connection, so it was as fast as I could have external storage be connected to the Mac, which was nice too. But, and this is where I get really obsessively, compulsively weird, it made noise. At first it made a lot of noise, which turned out to be just a glitch. The hard drives were clattering away when I first connected it. It was unbelievable, really loud. It turned out there was some issue with the Spotlight indexing that was causing it to happen. And once I cleared that up, things quieted down. But even so, the OWC has a fan. It's a quiet fan, not one that would be annoying at all. In fact, it's probably quieter than the fan that was in my Mac Pro that I'd been using. So overall, it's probably less noisy than my Mac Pro. And the hard drives itself, when it did read or write access, these are still, these were some, I think there's some Toshiba 3.5-inch traditional hard drives, and you can hear the read and write access that when they make it. It's pretty distinct. So that fixed the clattering noise, but I still could hear the fan that the ThunderBay was making. It wasn't that noisy. It wasn't as noisy, say, as the fan that had been in my Mac Pro, but it was still distinct, and I could still hear read-write access whenever the drives were doing that. And I didn't like it. It bothered me, especially when I would go over to my wife's iMac there and could barely hear anything, if at all. So I said, maybe maybe the ThunderBay was a mistake. Maybe this, maybe that. Maybe the whole iMac was a mistake. Maybe I should have got the Fusion drive. I started rethinking. I even called Apple and said, "Can I return this thing if I decide it's all a mistake?" And they said, "Yeah." And it was still within the 14 days. I mean, I just driving myself crazy more than anybody else. And so I finally came up with what I thought was a good solution. I got 2 of the Seagate portable drives. I can't show you one now.
You mean the little portable 3 or 2 point?
Those little, the portable ones. They run off USB power. They're USB 3 drives. They run off USB power. You don't have to plug them in. There's no fan. They're very small, compact. They're about the dimensions of a deck of cards. And I bought one to hold the extra data that didn't fit on the 0.5 gigabyte SSD, and one for backup. And they sit behind my iMac now, and I don't see them, I don't hear them. They work perfectly, and so now essentially, and I got a 4 gigabyte, a 2 gigabyte for my data, and a 4 gigabyte for backing up. So there's a total of 6 gigabyte terabytes. I got 2 terabytes. I meant a 0.5 terabyte SSD, not 0.5 gigabyte SSD, obviously. I got 2 terabytes and 4 terabytes drive, so I have 6 terabytes of data sitting behind the iMac, which is more than the 3 terabytes that I would have had with the 3 terabyte Fusion drive anyway, and it handles everything. And it's total silence. I mean, not a sound that I can hear. Maybe if my hearing wasn't going, I would hear something, but given the current level of my hearing, I hear nothing. And I think it's just a perfect solution. So I have no qualms anymore about having only a 0.5 terabyte in the in the iMac itself, because I have the 2 terabytes for additional data. It's perfectly fine. And so that's the solution I'd recommend.
What'd you do with the ThunderBay? Did you return that, or is it still there?
Well, that's a mixed story. I actually kept the ThunderBay because you didn't really want to ask that.
I do. Now I do.
When the new iMac came out last October, I didn't realize how much cognitive dissonance I was going to have over which iMac I was going to get at that point, or whether I was going to get one at all. I expected to just buy one like within a week of the announcement, and so I quickly ordered a ThunderBay because I wanted the ThunderBay ready to go when I got my iMac. And so I ordered the ThunderBay, and then decided to halt on ordering the iMac. I didn't wind up ordering the iMac until the end of January. And so by the time I finally figured out that I didn't want the ThunderBay, it was too late to return it because it had been more than 30 days or something that I'd owned it. But then I decided, aside from the money, which I was out $400 if I wanted to look at it that way, I kind of liked that I still had it. I still use it. I can turn it off most of the time, but I can still turn it on and access those drives whenever I want. I do an additional backup occasionally so that I have a backup of the backup. And I could still use it for anything else if I needed extra storage for any reason. Or if I needed the faster Thunderbolt connection speed for some reason, it's still available. So it's an inexpensive way to get that. If I thought about it enough, probably would not have ever got the ThunderBay at this point. But now that I have it, it's a nice little bonus.
I've not played with a ThunderBay or worked with one yet, but as I understand it, that can be configured a bunch of different ways. Like you said, you can have it do like a JBOD configuration where it just goes in and it's just a bunch of disks independently, or you can set it up in RAID configurations.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And if you don't have hard drives, you can even buy one directly from OWC with the hard drives already in it, configured for the RAID backup. So, yeah.
Yeah, very nice. Listen, we're going to geek out on this, so we might as well just go the whole way. When you set up your system on the new iMac, are you keeping everything, and I mean by that, like all your music, all your photos and everything, on the internal, or are you using symbolic links to put that stuff out on the other drives, or how did you set it up?
No, it wouldn't have fit all on the internal. I have on the internal drive are all the system files, and my home directory is on the internal half terabyte, except for music and except for the iTunes library and the Photos library. All the rest of my home directory is on the internal. So basically, everything, all the system type library folders that have all the files that change often are on the internal SSD. And so the external SSD only has stuff that I access occasionally, basically music and photos. And as it turns out, you asked whether I use symbolic links. I read all these articles about how to link your library, your iTunes library. Especially the problem is more with the iTunes. With the Photos library, you simply launch iPhotos holding down the Option key, I think, and it asks you which Photos library you want to use. And I just pick the one that's on the external drive, and that's the end of it. There's no symbolic links or anything that you have to use. It's as simple as that. For the iTunes library, they don't have that option. And there are lots of articles about how to configure your Macs if you want to access an iTunes library that's on a separate drive from your home directory and from your startup drive. And I decided initially to just ignore all that and simply make a common Finder alias for the library. So I went to the external drive and I made an alias of the iTunes library folder, and I dragged it over to where the iTunes library would be located in my home directory on the startup drive, and that's it. And I said, well, let's give that a try. It's probably not going to work because otherwise, why would all these articles say I have to do all this other crap? But let's start there, because if it works, it's the simplest solution. And it's worked fine. So I haven't had a problem. There was an initial problem with it saying it couldn't locate a couple of songs and stuff like that, but not a lot. And for some reason, almost everything it couldn't locate was by Trisha Yearwood. It's like that. It's like that. Okay, we don't like Trisha Yearwood. I don't know exactly. It wasn't just one album, because I like Trisha Yearwood, and I have about 5 or 6 Trisha Yearwood things I've acquired over the years, albums and videos and stuff like that. And so they have nothing particularly in common except that she's the singer on all of them. and like there was like 30 files that it wouldn't locate, and like 25 of them were by Trisha Yearwood. I could never figure out why that was. But anyway, once I resolved that, it's been working fine ever since, just with a simple alias.
Folks, we should say that Ted's picture froze there for a little while. It's not Ted or his computer. It's Skype. Sorry.
Well, actually, it was me. I was just standing very still.
Oh, very still.
and it fooled you. You thought the picture was frozen. But really,
I didn't think you could hold your eyes open that long without blinking. I'm impressed. So the other thing I wanted to find out, because I know giving up your Mac Pro was not traumatic, but it's just one of those things. Did you sell it, or did you retain it for other duties, or is it?
I'm trying to sell it right now, actually. So anyone who's listening and wants to buy it, contact me.
Cool.
Hasn't sold yet, but I'm not trying very hard because if I can't sell it for a really decent price, I'm just going to keep it. It still works perfectly well. I mean, I wound up using it just to get it ready for selling it. I turned it on and erased some of the zeroed out some of the hard drives that were on, make sure that I had no old data on it or anything like that. And I was like, this is kind of a nice computer.
If anybody wants to buy it, will you autograph it?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Okay. We're joking, but let's be serious about it. What do you know offhand the configuration so that folks?
2009 Mac Pro. I think it's the 4,1 model. It has, I think it has only 8 gigabytes of RAM in it, and it has a 128 gigabyte SSD and 3 hard drives that add up to a total of about 1.5 terabytes by the time you're done. It has dual optical DVD drives. And, that's about it.
Yeah, nice machine. Okay, so if you are interested, you can contact Ted on Twitter. You contact me by email, and I'll get it to Ted, whatever, and he'll autograph it. So that sounds like a pretty good deal.
I'll etch it on the inside of the lid that you open up.
Yeah, the way they did on the original Macs. Yeah, that's good. Boy, there was one other thing, and now I've lost it, that I was going to ask you about the whole transition. Oh, I know. After this, because your solution makes perfect sense, especially if the fan noise was bothering you. But I'm kind of intrigued. Has this changed your view on the whole issue of the Mac Pro design and the idea that, okay, you didn't have that internal storage, and now you've got 2 drives hanging off the back of your iMac? Do you think that not having those internal drives is now as big a deal as maybe you thought it was before, or that a lot of people still do with the Mac Pro? And let's leave the Mac Pro's power out of it for right now, but I'm just talking about the design and the aesthetics of it.
I'm less concerned. The external storage issue is not as big a deal as I thought it would be. I still am a little. I still find it a little bit annoying that if I want to use a DVD drive, which admittedly I don't do very often anymore, but if I do want to, I have to attach this external DVD drive. My wife and I share one, so whenever we want one, we just pass it to the other person. It was nice. It was especially nice back in the days, which I, again, don't do very much anymore, when I copied DVDs, that I had 2 internal DVD drives. I could just stick a blank drive in one, the thing I wanted to copy in the other, say copy, and that would be it. So can't do that at all anymore unless I would to buy another one. So some of that bothers me, but also I guess what bothers, there's 2 things that bother me the most, and they're both down the road. One is not so much the hard drives. Well, yeah, I guess it is the hard drives. Well, one is that I can't upgrade the internal hard drive. Let's imagine that I want to keep this iMac for 5 years, say. And let's imagine that 2 years from now, the price of SSDs drops dramatically, or they come out even more so with a different type of SSD that's 10 times faster than the one we have now. And so I could get the super fast 2 terabyte SSD for $400. Too bad. There's no way I'm going to get it inside this iMac. I'd have to buy a new iMac to take advantage of that. Whereas if I had the Mac Pro, I could just, assuming that the hardware was compatible, which so far it had been, or assuming that I had a new Mac that was designed like the Mac Pro, I could just slide out my old SSD, slap in the new one, and I'm ready to go. It's very, very nice. Can't do that with the iMac. The other thing is that let's get back, say, to the Thunderbolt USB-C thing. Suppose, I'm figuring it's not going to bother me very much when they inevitably come out with a new iMac. If I wanted to attach a secondary 5K display, maybe it would, but I don't intend to do that. Though I probably will want to attach a 4K display. To get sidetracked here again, the difference between the Retina display that I'm looking at right now and my old Cinema display, which is off to my left, is unbelievable. You wouldn't notice it as much in a store if you're just staring at the two screens side by side from some distance. But if you're reading text just a few inches away from the screen, as you probably know, the difference is outstanding. And once you get used to reading text on a Retina display, there's no going back to the Cinema display. So, but that's another story. But anyway, the other thing is, suppose I got really convinced that it was a big mistake to have gotten this iMac right now, and I should have waited for the Thunderbolt USB-C one, because for some reason that was going to be a big deal. Even though I don't think that's the case, but let's suppose I'm wrong. And so I decide to sell this iMac and get a new one. Well, I now have to sell this 5K display that I just raved about. There's no way I can sell the iMac and keep the 5K display. The 5K display goes with the iMac, and so I have to go through the hassle and likely take a loss on it, because I can't, obviously, in some sense, I can't sell it for the price of a new 5K display. So I have to sell a perfectly good 5K display for hundreds of dollars less than I paid for it, so to speak, and then buy the exact same 5K display when I get the new iMac that has USB-C and Thunderbolt 3 in it. I would really like if there was a headless iMac that I could just sell. If I could have gotten a Mac Mini, say, that had the internal hardware of the iMac and was capable of attaching to a 5K display, I probably would have gotten that. And if Apple made a 5K display that was external, I would have gotten that. And something like that may exist once Thunderbolt 3 is around. I think that could make the difference. But that's the other negative. But there's no way. I mean, the other side of it is there's no way that if I kept the Mac Pro, I would have been able to do all that anyway, because the Mac Pro can't drive a 5K Retina display. So it's not like I would have had one with the old Mac Pro.
This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of PDF Pen, PDF Pen Pro, PDF Pen for iPad and iPhone, PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPhone and iPad, Text Expander Touch, and Disk Label. Find out more about all their great products at smilesoftware.com. I'm betting that you use PDFs in one way or another on a pretty regular basis. At least every week, maybe every day, maybe even multiple times a day. That's why you need PDF Pen from Smile. With PDF Pen, you can do everything to PDFs that you want to do, that you need to do. Mark them up. Securely redact them so that the parts you don't want read can't be read. With PDF Pen Pro, you can take it a step farther. Run your PDFs through optical character recognition so that they become editable text. Export them to Microsoft Word, export them to Excel, export them to PowerPoint. And that's just the beginning. Create and edit fillable PDF forms. Create a document table of contents. Scan material directly to PDF from a scanner. Sign PDFs with your signature. Convert entire websites to PDFs so you can read them offline. The list goes on and on. The fun doesn't stop there, though. With PDF Pen for iPhone and iPad, some of the most powerful features of PDF Pen are available on your iPhone or your iPad, so you can work on the go. Want to tap all that power quickly and easily? Michael E. Cohen helps you do it in Take Control style with Take Control of PDF Pen 7. With Michael's help, you'll be a PDF Pen power user in no time. Don't take my word for it, though. Download a trial version of PDF Pen from smilesoftware.com and find out just how much you can do with a PDF. That's PDF Pen and PDF Pen Pro for Mac, and PDF Pen for iPhone and iPad for iOS, all from Smile, the makers of world-class software. Thanks to Smile for being the longest-running sponsor of MacVoices. I go in and I look very covetously at the 5K iMacs and try to justify it, and right now I haven't been able to, but boy, they do look nice. There's no question about it. They seem to be just such sweet machines. But I'm so glad that you took us down the path of trying to make those decisions, because when I do look at them and price them out and try to figure out the cost benefit, the Fusion versus SSD. I mean, I've got SSDs in my MacBook Pros, and I mean they're amazing. But I've worked with Fusion drive equipped iMacs, and they aren't quite as snappy when it comes to, say, startup and that kind of thing. But on the other hand, there's certainly, I don't know that it would bother me that much, to go with the Fusion. So it's kind of like you got a couple good options as opposed to one okay option and one not so okay option.
Yeah, it's a close call. I wouldn't want to try to argue. So if someone was convinced that they would be happier with the Fusion drive, I wouldn't try to argue them away from that. Yeah. I just think what I got was the right decision for me.
Good. One other thing I wanted to make sure, because we ran along on that, but I think it's I think it's well worth the discussion for folks that are considering. But I'm anxious to get your take on the Apple or the FBI v. Apple issue that's going on right now, because it seems like that changes day to day, hour to hour. We just did a Mac jury last night, and already things have changed since then. What is your thinking on this?
Well, unfortunately, the full discussion of my thinking on this with some back and forth from you would probably take us beyond the time we have left. So I'll have to try to see if I can make it brief. Overall, I'm definitely in Apple's camp. The idea that the FBI has tried to make a really solid case. I'm sure it's not coincidental that it came out this way. That here is a case of someone who is dead, who is a terrorist, whose phone he didn't even own, was owned by the employer who he worked for, and who has 6 weeks worth of data that the FBI wants access to. They're not asking Apple to break into the iPhone for them. They're just saying disable the feature that erases the hard drive after 10 attempts to enter a password that isn't correct. We'll do the rest ourselves. We only want it for this case. You can even do it, you can even do it in such a way that it only works for this iPhone, and you can erase it, whatever it is you did after we're done getting the data. I could certainly imagine if I heard the FBI roll all that out, and especially say if I was a relative of one of the victims of the San Bernardino attack, saying, yeah, that makes sense. Why is Apple going to let potentially let allies of a murderer get off because they don't want to let the FBI access their phone? And I'm sure that was the FBI's thinking. Here was a situation where they could maximize the chance of getting sympathy from the general public for their position. And it's almost enough for me to buy it. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that it just isn't going to wash. That there's no way. First of all, you're asking Apple to do something, to create something. You're not asking them to do something that, it's not like asking them to give you access to iCloud, which they did, actually. So Apple tried to be cooperative, and they got access to the person's iCloud data, which is in some ways a little bit ironic. We're also arguing over if the guy had backed up to iCloud the day before the attack, there'd be no discussion about any of this. All this protection that the iPhone has, and you lose the protection as soon as you back yourself up to iCloud, apparently. I mean, the data's potentially encrypted on iCloud, but still, it made me think that if I was really worried about what was on my iPhone and what would happen if the FBI got a hold of it, I wouldn't use iCloud backup. That's time to give up on that. So if you're a terrorist, you don't want to back up to iCloud. But that aside, Apple would have to create a tool that doesn't exist specifically for this purpose, and then they would have the idea that this would only be done for this phone is the silly part, because once you set the precedent, once you've done it, it opens the door to do it again. If the next time the FBI comes to Apple with a similar situation, they're going to say, well, you did it for us last time, how is this different? You have to do it again. And not only that, I mean, a prosecutor in New York State already said that they have something like over 100 cases that are similar, where they would want Apple to give them access to the iPhones in those cases as well, and on and on and on. And it just and essentially, once it happens in enough cases, the idea that there's any security at all, just about, is lost. Because Apple, you can just see Apple's advertisement. Yes, we encrypt your data, we make it as secure, unless somebody wants it, and then then they can get it because we'll help them get it. I mean, that's just silly. And so essentially, giving it to them in this case, to me, in my mind, amounts to giving up on the idea that there's any real security at all. And I think most people who are in supportive of Apple's position, anyway, realize that, and that's why they're supportive.
I think that's an excellent summary, and I guess the FBI keeps wanting to say, well, just this one time. But what happens if and when, and I hope we don't have it, but when there's the next mass shooting or the next terrorist attack, whether it's in the U.S. or one of our allies, and they come to Apple and say, we want you to open this for the very same reasons. There's always going to be a good justification for why just this once, and I said this in the Mac Jury Show. Sympathies absolutely to the families, and I hope I'm never in that position, but I know at least one of the families has come out in support of Apple's position on the issue, and I just feel like it's the head versus the heart. If you understand it and think about it, the head will take you in one direction. If you're not careful and listen to the way that it's been spun by some outlets, including the FBI, then it takes you in another direction. And you got to go with your head every time.
Well, yes, and it makes me think of other quotes. I'm an ACLU card-carrying member. And I've gone to some ACLU sponsored events, and one event years ago now, but I remember I think it had to do with the march, the issue of the marchers in Skokie, Illinois, who were Nazis, and the ACLU came out in favor of allowing them to march, and there was all this discussion: how can you be supportive of Nazis and so on? And the ACLU response was essentially, it's easy to defend a person's civil rights when what they want to do you're in agreement with. When you don't agree with them, that's when it really matters. If you're only going to support civil rights when you agree with the cause, then you're not really supporting civil rights. And then there are times when it can be very difficult to be supportive of a person's civil rights when what they want to do is legal but abhorrent to your personal beliefs. And they said they didn't mean to be supportive of what they were saying, but they were supporting their civil right to do it. And that sort of stuck with me. And I always have to ask myself that question: Am I in favor of A or am I against A, simply because that is consonant with my personal beliefs on the subject? Or am I really trying to be objective about it? And if I'm trying to be objective about it, I side with Apple. And the other quote, and I forget who is it said, the other quote that always comes to mind for me in these situations is, when you try to sacrifice liberty for safety, you wind up with neither. And
I want people to understand. I mean, if you can in good conscience understand that by doing this, Apple opens the door to your privacy, not just to the shooter's privacy, but to your privacy and Ted's privacy and my privacy and everyone's, and not just to law enforcement or not just to the government, but also to the bad guys. Because this stuff is, it's now digital. So once it's out there, it's out there. And it is going to get out there. Sooner or later, one way or another, it's going to get out there. It may not happen immediately, but it will happen.
Yeah, well, yes, and you're reminding me of the other classic. I heard somebody say this, actually. There was an NPR story on this I was listening to the other day, and there was somebody saying, of course they should let people get into Apple's phones. There's nothing on my iPhone that I care whether the FBI, if my FBI wants to go into my phone, they're welcome to do it. And again, that's like saying, if the FBI wants to listen to all my personal conversations, if they want to listen to what you and I are saying right now, I have no objection because you and I aren't saying anything that I particularly care where the FBI hears. We'll probably put them to sleep. But that's not an argument in favor of saying that the FBI should have carte blanche to listen to whoever they want to listen to. It's not the same thing. And people have trouble, some people anyway, have trouble separating that.
Yeah. And it's, I guess to go back to my point, it's not just the FBI. I mean, maybe I would be okay with the FBI listening to all my conversations if I thought it would prevent one terrorist attack. Maybe I'd be willing to do that. Have to have a long, hard talk about it. But it's not just the FBI that's going to be using these tools. It's the hackers, it's the bad guys, the identity thieves, the people that want to compromise your credit card, or your health insurance, or your life insurance, or any of a dozen other things that are private to you and to me and to everyone, not just in this country but to everywhere. Yeah, and in that regard, I also have to say I'm impressed with the level of security that Apple managed to achieve here, because you could be sure that the FBI, the CIA, whatever, have professional hackers that are working for them to be able to break into things. And essentially, the FBI, at least, is admitting that after their best efforts, they can't do anything to break into this iPhone without Apple's help. So that's a bit impressive. Yeah, and it makes it all the more worth fighting for. Mm-hmm, yeah. So at this point, I think we say, as we said before, don't take Ted's word, take my word. Go and read up on this and make sure you understand all the implications, not just the emotional ones, but the factual ones. And then contact your legislators and let them know that you support Apple's position. If you do, and if you don't, that's okay too. But make an educated, informed decision and then get involved in this, because this has wide-reaching implications. Yeah, I just, in that regard, I'd say as strongly as I feel about this is not one of those open and shut case issues where I think, I'm right and anybody who disagrees with me is wacko. I can understand that there can be some legitimate basis for taking both sides of this issue. What are some of the issues where you think the other side's wacko? I don't. That's what I'm saying. No, this one I know, but I mean, there are other issues that you indicated that. That's not good. You don't want to go there at this point in our conversation. Ted, we got to do this more often. This is just way too much fun. It really is. It's so good to see you. Thank you for sharing all your thought processes on the upgrade too. I think anyone that's out there thinking about an iMac, we all go through that process of, should I buy it now? Should I wait? Should I wait for the next one? And what then if I decide to buy it now? What options am I going to get, and what's it going to cost me? And so, and I have to admit, your solution to the noise problem is interesting. I use those drives all the time, but I use them as portables. I wouldn't have thought of making them part of a quasi-permanent solution. I might not have thought of it either, except that I had used one of them as a secondary backup on my Mac Pro. And so I knew, it had been working for years, and so I knew from experience that these things could be connected to a Mac on 24 hours a day for years and still work okay, which I initially might not have thought was the case. And so I said, okay, it's worth a try. And it's working. Good advice. We'll do it again, and we'll do it a lot sooner than a couple months, if you're willing. We were going to talk, if we had time, about upcoming Apple media events and rumors and so on. So maybe we can do that next time. Yeah, and we'll definitely get one in before that, before the media event that I think is March 15th. Yeah, we'll give it a try. Okay, sounds good. Good to see you. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacNotables on MacVoices. Actually, I think that kicks off MacNotables for 2016. So look for more Ted and more of the rest of the team. And I apologize, the light is fading out the window, and if it looks like in some film noir at this point, that's because you're seeing filtered light through a Venetian blind, and there's no natural light in the room right now because it was pretty bright when we started. It's getting pretty dark now. It just makes you look mysterious. Okay, cool. Yeah. Until the next time, folks, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the MacVoices blog. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Do more with your Apple tech by subscribing to the free MacVoices magazine on Flipboard by visiting macvoices.com/magazine. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.